All right, we're about to go live. This was an unannounced class that we're doing because I felt the need for it, especially since last last week, last Friday, no Saturday, we went over emotions and the application of the gospel and the good news to our emotions. So what we decided to do was to do this as a little bit of a supplementary um, class to the marriage class that we're doing on Tuesday in the Alpha series, because one of the problems that we have is time. There's always time, so we kind of wanted to do this as a supplementary lesson because it's so important. Now, the title there says anger management, but what we're really talking about is really learning to deal with our anger, with our pain, with our hate, right? We could really talk about dealing with hatred. One of the biggest problems um, Christians have, believers have, is really dealing with hatred, understanding hatred, because we're not supposed to do that. It's the opposite, it's the antithesis of God, who is love. So, how in the world can we hate? And we usually deny hate, we usually stuff it. So, we'll get to all that, where it comes from, control, mostly from control and hurt feelings. But I want to put a quote up here from James Baldwin, who he was a playwright, author, and he states, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is that because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." And another word that you can put in there instead of saying that they cling to it is that they deny. They deny their hatred. So it's important that we make that distinction. Okay. And we're going to talk about, again, we're going to talk about emotions. We talked about it in our last Alpha Series class. We talked about emotional management. And anger and hate go together. In fact, if we don't deal with our anger, it'll turn to resentment and hatred. Okay. Um, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says that resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And resentment, bitterness, hatred has destroyed more families, more marriages than anything else. Okay, now when we talk about anger management, okay, one of the problems that we have is my dad's generation, my generation of kids, we grew up with fathers who parents and fathers especially just didn't know what to do with their anger. They didn't know how to handle it. There were no touchy feely classes about anger. There was no a lot of teaching on anger management. Um, the war had just ended with World War II, and it was good to be angry at the Nazis. So it was very very hard. And there's these cycles of anger. And I always ask in the class, when we start a class, how many of you, when you were angry, you did something or said something when you were really angry, and later on, when it dissipated, you thought to yourself, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And you regretted doing something. You were very angry. Hands go up all the time. Now, the Bible and the scriptures, we're never instructed not to be angry, or to have, like, anger is not sinful in and of itself. Okay. And it's not destructive in and of itself. Okay. But it needs to be expressed. It's when it comes to hatred. Hatred will hurt you. Hatred will hurt others. Hatred will destroy and rip families apart. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about our emotions, how to, emotional management. And really, when we talk about our relationship with God, when we talk about our relationship, and that God is love, and this gospel of Jesus Christ is good news, and what he's done for us that we couldn't do for ourselves is so magnificent. How do we apply that in the day to day? And another reason I'm doing this is because I've heard from two different sources. One was a news source, and one was a friend that is a police officer. That right now, because of this virus, domestic violence and dispute 911 calls are skyrocketing and going through the roof. And I suspect that that's because people have kept themselves busy and in denial about their unspoken hurts, their unspoken hurts and disappointments and resentments, and they keep busy with work or whatever, but now they're all together. And this is an opportunity. In the Chinese language, they use symbols for words, and their word for crisis, the two symbols that they have for crisis are danger and opportunity. Danger and opportunity. So a crisis is where danger and opportunity meet. This is the perfect time for healing and for families to deal with these things. And sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. Now, in the book, Bill Ewing and Dr. Strand, okay, Dr. Ray Strand, okay, they made some pretty outrageous statements. First, they said one of the greatest sources of physical and mental illness in the world today is unresolved anger. This is from the book Living by Design by Ray Strand and Bill Ewing. Look at that. And then Bill Ewing says in that book, in over 25 years of counseling, Bill can recall only a handful of situations where unresolved anger was not a significant issue. Now this is huge. This is so important. Now, when we look at our different categories of emotions, okay, if you look at this, at the top you have the supernatural. This is the fruit of the spirit. This is what God produces in us supernaturally. Love, joy, and peace. They surpass our circumstances. Our circumstances do not depend on us feeling those things. In fact, if you look at the negative category, you can actually experience anguish and joy, the supernatural joy, at the same time. Um, when I was grieving when I was in the rawness of grieving the death of my son, I was in anguish. There was this element of joy that was always there, and it was fighting to push through the anguish to be the dominant emotion, but it was there. So in my anguish, there was a supernatural element of joy. So what we're looking at is that in our anger, when you get angry, when it's whether your feelings get hurt, your plans get blocked, whatever it is, when you get angry, if you look at that negative emotion category, it's either going to slip into hate, or you can have an element of love even in the midst of the feeling of anger. So if you look at the categories, supernatural, positive, negative, and sinful, you have love, joy, and peace. In the positive, you have love, happiness, and contentment. In the negative, you have anger, anguish, and concern. And in the sinful, you have hate, self-pity, and anxiety. We went over this in the last Alpha class. So if you want to review it on our church page or my page, you can go back. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but what we're looking just specifically today is the anger to hate, or is there going to be anger to a component, or even an element of love in the midst of the anger. We're only going to deal with that specific emotion today because it's important that we really understand that we have some self-awareness here of our emotions. So this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with when we're angry, right? We don't want it to slip into resentment and hatred. Right now, there's some terminology that I want to cover right now because we're going to be using the terminologies as we go on. Okay. First of all, I want you to look at this diagram. Okay. Now, the outward triangle of this diagram represents our physical body. Okay. That interacts with our environment, but our physical body also interacts with our mind, emotions, and our will. It interacts with our soul and our spirit. Now, the Bible is very clear that God has put his spirit in us, that God has made us a brand new person, that God has given us a new spirit. If you look at Ezekiel chapter 36, God says that he will remove our heart of stone. He will put a new spirit in us, and that he would put his spirit in us. So there is the spiritual reality of who we really are in Jesus is this new person that's loved, accepted, forgiven, but it's a spiritual person that is enveloped, permeated with the life of God. God is in you and you are in God. Now there's this other component, this other conditioning, this other leftover conditioning, whatever we want to call it. The Bible calls it the flesh. Psychology calls it ego, right? Paul called it the old man or the flesh, right? The natural man, the natural conditioning, all right? So when we talk about the difference between spirit and flesh, or the new person that you are and the flesh, that's what we're talking about. Okay, we're going to get into this more and more during the Alpha series. So if you join us this Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we're really going to talk about the realities of the flesh versus the spirit. But for tonight, for this particular class, you're going to be instructed to understand that you are a new person, but your emotions, okay, are very real and part of your soul, not the spiritual realities of who God's made you to be in Jesus Christ. If you don't understand the terminology, just hang in there. You'll get some good practical stuff from this class. Now, um, so let's look at, let's look at, first of all, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is from John Glenn's book called Power to Love. Okay, and he has a very specific chapter in that about emotional management, dealing with our emotions. Right now, let's talk about anger. Anger usually is fear or hurt in disguise. Fear or a secondary reaction to fear or hurt. Okay, if you look like an animal trapped in a corner and it looks mean and vicious, right? It's really afraid, right? It's afraid, so it's going to lash out at you. Okay, we constantly deal with fear of failure and fear of rejection. Fear of failure, fear of rejection. Okay, so that's fear, and that causes anger, defensiveness, anger. I think when you think about fear, also think about like the fear of rejection. Once that rejection hits, then you're hurt. You have hurt feelings. So what are you going to do with those hurt feelings? Okay, that anger comes from hurt feelings, and especially with the hurt feelings causing anger, it quickly will slip into hatred. Okay, hating. Okay. So we have to deal with our anger. Okay, now Ross Campbell in his book, How to Really Love Your Child, and he has another book, How to Really Love Your Teenager. He came out with what was called the anger ladder. And I want you to take a look at this for a minute because we're going to get into something important about expressing our anger. Now look at this. This is a ladder, meaning the bottom. The bottom is the worst expression of anger that there could be. Okay, at the very bottom, number 9, passive aggressive behavior. I think this is a simplified chart of his. I think he might have had 15. Now, if you look at number 8, loud, cursing, displacing anger to other sources, destroying property, verbal abuse, physical abuse, screaming, emotional destructive behavior, those things, okay, those things are very destructive, very, very bad. The passive aggressive behavior and the loud cursing they look exactly opposite, right? Now, if you look at number 7, what's eliminated? Physical abuse. If you look at number 6, maybe they're not verbally abusing. So the idea is if someone's really, really having terrible anger problems, the idea is to just kind of control their anger by eliminating one or two things, learning to deal. Now, these are people that have dealt with rage and anger and are in anger management classes, maybe. But I want to go back to number 9. What is passive aggressive behavior? Well, it's just what it says. It's very passive, but it's geared at getting back. It's geared at maybe revenge. It's geared at spite. And what does it look like? Well, it might look like on the freeway, if someone cuts you off or you don't like the way you're driving, you'll get in front of them and then you'll slow down and you'll go really slow, right? And then they're laying on the horn. That would be passive aggressive behavior. In teenagers' lives, often it's forgetting things, forgetting to do things, or saying they forgot, saying that they forgot to do their chores, or saying that they did and they really didn't do them. Passive aggressive behavior. It's like this "you can't control me" type of thing is passive aggressive behavior. Often when there's a passive aggressive situation, the partner in marriages, it's usually the partner that looks angry when it's really the passive aggressive behavior, the passive aggressive person that's really angry. And a lot of times it'll go like this: the passive aggressive person will blow the other person up and they'll be so mad. They'll be so angry, right? And they're blowing up, and the passive aggressive person said, "Why are you so mad? Why are you getting so mad over nothing?" Right? And I remember when I did a marriage class, and my mentor John Glenn told me, he says, if you're counseling for the same problem, just start a class. It'll save you a lot of time. And so I had a few marriages that were in disarray. Some of them were married quite a long time doing counseling. And I noticed that in this particular group, the men were passive aggressive. They were being passive aggressive in their behavior towards their wives. Okay. And another way of passive aggressive behavior, another way to explain that is saying they push your buttons, right? They know which buttons to push to make you mad. And they like a lot of times making people mad when they're passive aggressive. Usually, passive aggressive people have buried and they have a lot of resentment. Sometimes they've tried to deal with their anger or express it or relay it to the other person that I don't like what you're doing. I don't like the way you treat me or whatever. And they don't listen. So then they just become, they become resentful and passive aggressive. So I remember when we were doing this marriage class and I went over this and explained this, I had a guy call me up the next day that was in this class. And we were friendly. He was a friend of mine. And he told me, he said, "I hate you. He said, I couldn't sleep last night and I'm really hating you." I said, "Why?" He said, and this is what he said, look at the chart. He said, "I can't accept the fact that I'm worse than someone that curses and screams and yells and hits and break things and it's verbally abusive and drinks and is abusive to their family." He goes, I can't accept that. So I quietly said to him, you realize you just admitted to me that you're a passive aggressive jerk, right? You realize that you're kind of admitting that to me. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, how's that working for you? Your wife hates you. She don't like you. She don't like being with you. How's that passive aggressive stuff working for you?" See, the problem too with someone that's a number 9, Someone that's a number 9, they're not going to be sent to anger management. Someone that's number 8, okay, they're going to be sent to anger management. And I know a man, and it's usually the opposite way, but I know a man that went for anger counseling, and the counselor, trying to help his marriage, and the counselor said, I'd really like to talk to your wife, and kind of turned the spotlight on the wife, that she was the one with the real anger problem. And the wife didn't like that, and that marriage didn't last. But you see what I'm saying? A lot of times, a number 9, they're not going. They don't look angry. A lot of times they're very passive, right? And that passive aggressive behavior will destroy you and destroy others, right? Now, we don't want to be an 8. We don't want to be a 7. We want to get up here, right, to number 1, to have pleasant conversations, to focus on the source, etc., etc. Well, in order to do that, we really have to engage in anger management ourselves. We have to own our piece of the pie. We have to clean our side of the street. And to be honest, I found when I do these exercises, when I spend time with God and in meditation and reflecting on my anger, I do what we call the trip in, and I do some of these exercises. When I do these things, a lot of times, whatever I thought I was mad at, whatever the issue was, it goes away. Quite often, if my wife and I are in a tiff and my little feelings are hurt, if I really follow the leadership of the Spirit and I really look at why I'm angry, think about it, talk it over with God, a lot of times it goes away. It just goes away, because often, whenever people are in conflict, and this is another constant, right? This is another thing that is really constantly true. When I say it's a constant, I mean it shows up everywhere, and it's real everywhere. So a lot of times when people are in conflict with one another, right? They will, the whatever the external issue is. So there's this thing that people are angry about. Okay, in couple A and couple B, there's this issue that's there. Well, that external conflict, right? While that conflict is there, there's an internal conflict going on with both people. Both people involved are experiencing their own internal conflict. So a lot of times that external conflict is not going to be resolved. It will never be resolved until each person involved in the conflict, okay, deal with their own conflict. Okay. So that internal external conflict that people go through, okay, you have to deal with the internal first. You have to deal with, each person deals with their internal conflict. And that's what I'm saying. I find that often when I deal with my own internal conflict, whatever the external thing was, it goes away. It doesn't matter. It didn't even matter. It was petty. Do you ever have an argument with your spouse or with somebody that, like, once the argument gets fully heated, you're like, I forget what we were even originally talking about. Okay? And that goes directly into the personal needs that we talked about on Thursday. But I want to look at, James has a very good recipe. Okay. Now, when we talk about resentment and hatred, all too often we do one of two things. And John covers this in the book, Power to Love. We either stuff our emotions, our hurt, or we dump it, right? We either stuff it or we dump it. Stuffing it is you deny it. You say, no, I'm not mad. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. But you're stuffing your hurt feelings. Now, this might have some immediate benefits, right? You don't escalate the argument. You don't escalate the fight unless you have a partner that really needs to talk things out and dogs you and says, I want to talk about it. I know there's something wrong, and they keep after you. But if you stuff it, it might avoid the conflict for a short amount of time, but you stuffed it. Where is it going to go? It has to go somewhere. Okay, so stuffing it really leads to, and we talked about it in this beginning, right? Stuffing it will lead to physical problems, physical psychosomatic disorders, and it takes its toll on your body and your immune system when you stuff those hurt feelings. The other thing that we might do, we might dump them, we might vent, we might fully let them out. If we're doing it in the person that we're in conflict, we're going to say and do things that we later regret, and that we're going to hurt feelings, and we get caught up into this cycle of hate, hurt, hate. This hate, hurt, hate cycle. So what do we do? Okay, what do we do when we are angry, when our feelings are hurt, and to keep us from slipping into resentment and hatred? Okay. Well, the thing is that first of all, we do vent, right? We bring our emotions to God. God is the only one that knows you and knows everything about you and knows exactly what's going on in your heart and mind, right? So you start with the one who created you. You start with God. Now, before we get into this, I'm going to go in two steps here. First, I'm going to go and talk about those of us who have let the resentment and the bitterness fester, where you're hating. We don't like to admit that we hate. We don't think as a Christian you should be capable of hating because it's the opposite of God, who is love. But believe me, in our natural ability, in our flesh, we hate. We have to be honest. You have to be honest with hate. Hate has destroyed families, nations, countries. It's ripped this world apart. Hatred. And on an individual level, it rips us apart and it kills others. However, anger and hatred is easier to hang on to than the grief, the pain. I remember I went when my son died. I went to classes and I met with groups, and remember one lady talking about that her husband, he's angry and he's hateful, and I said that's easy. It's easier to deal with than the bereavement and the grief. Not long term, but short term it is, because when you have a loss, the grieving process, and the loss that I faced was the loss of my son. You're ripped apart, and it's the most agonizing, painful things. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. But I could see where hanging on to the hatred and the bitterness, back to our Baldwin quote, going back to our hatred and our bitterness is easier, than the pain. So a lot of times it's going to get worse before it gets better because you're going to deal with pain. So I'm talking first about those of us who have let it slip to hatred. And I think I told the story that when I got involved with Alpha Ministries 25 years ago, and Alpha Ministries works, it's a recovery church, a recovery model, and there were a lot of people around that had done the 12 steps, alcoholics, and there was a good friend of mine, and 12 steppers, they had something I wanted. They did. And I had been, a Christian, a student of the Bible, a person of faith for like 13, 14 years, but I wanted what they had. And as we went through the steps, when we got to step 4, which is a fearless moral inventory, right? He told me, he said, all right, now I want you to do a resentment list. You have to get real about your resentment and hatred. I said, I'm an easygoing guy. I'm a good guy, man. I'm easygoing. You love people, forgive. God talks about, I don't resent anybody. And he said, you're full of shit. I want you to do this. You do it or you're gone. I'm firing you. I'm not going to be your sponsor. I'm not going to work with you on these steps. And I kept arguing with him. He said, Bill, just get alone with God, ask him to show you, and be honest. And I tell you the truth. I so, and it's a true story. And what I found is I either stuffed, I clammed up, or I blew up with my anger problems. So that's what I'm talking about. This first little exercise and diagram. First of all, you be brutally honest about your hatred and assign it to your flesh. Separate your true self from your flesh. It's easier. Like if you say, well, I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to hate. All right, you're a Christian and you're not supposed to hate. All right. You're right in the sense that the new person that God made you to be, the spiritual reality of who you are in Christ, yes, that person, that new person, that inner man, okay, does not hate. But there's this other, Paul said, there's this other thing at work in you in Romans 7. In Romans 7, you read that, think about applying this to loving others all the time, right? Assign it to your flesh. Separate your true self from your flesh. Ask God to deal with the hatred. Okay? You have to be brutally honest with God about it. Okay? And you receive God's forgiveness for hating. You receive God's forgiveness for resenting. Right? You receive it. You receive God's forgiveness for all those, for that. Now they might have done something horrible to you. You may not think that they deserve it, but and you're justified in your hatred. But you know what? Jesus demonstrated at the cross that anything less than Father, forgive them, they know not what they do, is dysfunctional. And please, I'm pleading with you not to see this as some law system that you're worthless and condemned for hating. This is God setting you free. God's love is so magnificent. And he's not taking sides. His goal is to restore you and to restore the other person. Listen, I'm convinced that God either loves everybody or he loves nobody. And if you think that he doesn't love that other person that you're hating, then you're missing the big picture. Okay, God is bigger, more magnificent, and his beautiful, lovely, fantastic gift of forgiveness covers it all. You're forgiven, I'm forgiven, that person that offended you is forgiven. Doesn't mean you have to be warm and syrupy and that you even have to be reconciled to them. But forgiveness is your part. So you forgive the one that hurt you and you leave it there. Okay? You leave it there. So this is when it's been stuffed for a long time and you finally deal with it. And you just kind of leave it right there. Okay? So if you look at James, James gives the great now I'm talking about when you're in a relationship with people, right? When you're in a relationship with someone, you've done the resentments, you've dealt with that, and now when we're angry, when we're in a relationship and we get angry, how do we keep the anger from slipping into resentment and hatred? I think James has the perfect recipe in the James chapter 1 for this, and we're going to take a look at it. Okay, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Now, this is beautiful. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Let's unpack that a little bit. Okay. He tells us to be quick to listen. All right, quick to listen to God, right? Allow God to speak to you about A, your identity in Him, and B, that your needs are met. That hurt that we're talking about, those hurt feelings, that rejection usually comes from someone making you feel unloved and unaccepted. And you're threatened to, and your mate has either shown you, done something, and you think, well, I'm not loved, I'm not accepted. So you have to allow God to speak to you about identity. Who are you? You are God's beloved child. You are God's perfect child who He loves. He's in your corner. He's on your side. How about, and what about your spouse or your child or whoever else? God loves them just the same. He's not gonna take sides, right? So listen to God speak to you about your identity, that you're more than a conqueror through Christ, that you're an heir of God, a co-heir with Christ. You know what it means to be a co-heir with Christ? That means your presence on this earth is just as important to God as when God, just as your presence on this earth is just as important to God as Jesus' presence when He was on this earth and for all eternity, to be a co-heir with Jesus Christ. Your needs are met. Allow God to show you that you're loved, accepted, forgiven. You have meaning and purpose in life. If you're not familiar with the Alpha series, I would strongly recommend that you get the book and read about your personal needs. We cover them. If you go to lesson 2 of the Alpha series on our pages, you'll find all about those personal needs and how God can minister to you and affirm you. Okay? And then after you listen to God, you're able to listen to the other person. You can take a deep breath. You don't have to justify yourself. You don't have to save yourself. You don't have to get that other person to love you or accept you because those needs are met. Now you can listen to them. And listening to someone else is always an act of love. So you're able to listen to them. Right? Now notice that also James tells us, right, that man's anger does not bring about the righteous life God requires. What are we usually trying to do? What do we usually try to do when we're in this battle? We're trying to convince the other person that we're right and they're wrong. You were wrong. You hurt my feelings. Therefore, you should act this, that, and the other way. You're right. I'm wrong. Your anger will not change anybody. Your anger will not bring about the righteous life that God requires. I used to get angry at myself and try to change myself. And God showed me your anger, Bill, is not going to bring about the righteous life that God requires. The only thing that brings about the righteous life that God requires is His Spirit in us, changing us from the inside out. The process of a loving Father, a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an elder brother of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit flowing in and through us, changing us from the inside out. And it's personal, deeply personal to each one of us. God is able to speak to you personally right where you're at and push every truth that's troubling you, every lie that's troubling you. He's able to push His truth deep down into your heart. So God, He does not bring about the righteous life that God requires. And guess what? How about starting with husband and wife, or whoever you're in argument with? We're both right, right? Because we've both been made righteous. So let's find out what God wants. Or how about we're both wrong and only Jesus Christ is right? So let's find out what He wants. You get the picture there. If you can't invite God into the midst of your ugly conflicts, then like what do you think? He's only going to hang out with you when you're being nice? When you need Him the most. So be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, right? So you listen to God while you're going through this exercise of being brutally honest about your hatred and your anger, right? When you're listening to God, He's going to speak to you. Okay? So instead of stuffing or dumping, we go to God and we dump it all on Him, and He's going to speak to us. He's going to minister to us. He's going to bring us through it all. Now, I don't know. Is my brother there? Scott, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Can you
Now,
hear me?
Yeah, the one reason I wanted to bring you on is because you're a doctor, you're a chiropractic doctor, and you've taught me a lot about nutrition and a lot about how our body works. And you don't have to talk about that if you don't want. I know that you've been listening, but we talked a lot about anger, a lot about the effects of stuffing anger and keeping resentment in. I just kind of wanted to know what your experience is because I know you have a expression that you use with people a lot of times when you're ministering to them physically, that you got to let the bear out. A lot of what your stiff back and all that has to do with stuffing things. And you say let the bear out. I remember you saying that. So what are you thinking?
Well, I'm sorry I couldn't get my camera to work. But, there's a lot that can be unpacked, but the short of it is um, sometimes experience speaks louder than, the statistics and papers and information that I could bore everyone with journal articles and yada, yada, yada. But the experience is, sometimes as a chiropractor, you're working with certain people and you're not sort of getting the results you want or they want. And you start diving into other things. And then you find out, there's some unresolved issues or things of that nature. And, you know, people work on them and all of a sudden, their musculoskeletal stuff balances out. So, there's a repetition of that happening over the last 20 something years that I've been a chiropractor. So, it's anecdotal evidence and that kind of thing, but it's powerful for the person who is in that experience. And like I said, there's probably you would know more than me because you're a counselor, but I'm sure there's all sorts of journal articles that would speak to this. But as far as just hands-on experience of being a chiropractor for over 20 years, yeah, there is a lot of, people know it. Some people store their tension in their shoulders. Some people, it's weird. It's different areas, but people know it. You get stressed, you get tense, or you bury something, and there's something in your subconscious that's not really gone or cleared out, and it manifests as a lot of times stress and tension in the body. Or sometimes, you know, there's other, organ systems that other people have, you know, kind of championed and pioneered about the somatovisceral responses and the emotions in the mind and the coming into all that somatovisceral stuff. And, it goes on and on. But the bottom line is, yeah, if something's stuffed or if something's unresolved and it's really deep in there, it's running some sort of program. And a lot of times the program shows up in the musculoskeletal system. And other times, common one is, as the saying goes, they're all knotted up. Well, sometimes it's, gastrointestinal issues.
Yeah.
And, it's 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 something that you see.
Yeah, and I remember one time when my back was out and I was, it was healing, and I was in the classroom and there was this tense situation that started between two students, and I went over to um to deal with it, and because of the stress in my body, man, my back freezed up and I was in pain again, and and it was all, I didn't do anything physically. It was all because of the stress and my emotions and my muscles tensing up. And I know that you and I have talked several times, about our, dealing with our own anger and how we're conditioned to act and things that we're to do. And it's that initial, for me, it's always that, initial, where do I go with it? Where do I bring this anger? And what I found was that, God is, he's more than able. I mean, if you look at this, there's this scripture that I'm going to put up here. When we're talking about venting to God, you don't have to be nice and use the King James English when you're venting to God. When we're talking about letting the bear out, we're talking about letting God have it both barrels, because he's big enough to handle it, number one. Number two, he already knows it's there. You can stuff it all you want and paint on a smile and say, "Oh no, I'm not really mad. I'm not really whatever." But look at this. Now, people get confused with this psalm because they think that God's promoting violence or whatever. No, this shows us the freedom that you think God answered this prayer. You think God went and said, "Okay, I'm going to let people go take little kids and bash their heads on the rock." No, this is someone that's so hurt, so angry, and that is caught in this national hate, hurt, hate cycle. And they're saying Babylon's doomed to destruction. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infant and dashes their heads, dashes against the rocks. That is pure evil, pure anger, pure hatred. But what the psalmist is doing is venting their feelings and emotions towards God. And God's big enough to absorb it and handle it. So when you're really mad at somebody, let God have it. But what God's going to do and what He's constantly done for me is while I'm doing that, He's showing me, number one, that He loves me and He loves the other person involved. But number two, that I love that other person. I mean, I'm talking about ambivalent feelings. When you're angry or hurt by people that you're called to love and that you want to love and that you desire, those ambivalent feelings are so hard for households to handle. And I know that it's going on. I sense that it would. But now with the reports and the domestic violence and 911 calls going up, it's an opportunity for people to heal. So that's the exercise, is to bring it to God, be perfectly honest about Him. Let Him minister to you. Let Him speak to you. Let Him open up your mind and heart to the truth, right? And He will deal with it. Now, we're not talking about it. If you're in an abusive situation where someone's constantly verbally abusing you or physically abusing you, we're not talking about that kind of hurt. You get out of there. You call the police on that person if that's the way you need to love them. But what I'm talking about is when we get angry, we might yell, we might hurt each other's feelings, we might say or do things. It might be unintentional, it might be intentional that we hurt each other's feelings. That we use this venting to God, because stuffing it, like Scott said, it's gonna cause psychosomatic problems. And then Scott said in the counseling situation, yeah, one of the non-organic causes of depression. When I say non-organic, some people, their brain chemistry might go towards that. But one of the non-organic, when I say that, these are things that people that can be pretty normal that have slipped into depression. One of the biggies is anger and hatred turned inward, stuffed and turned inward. And there's the chicken and the egg concept of negative feelings fuel depression, negative feelings and negative thoughts fuel the imbalance in your brain chemistry. Which came first? Did the imbalance in your brain chemistry cause all the negative thinking, or the negative thinking? It doesn't matter. Once it's there, they feed off of each other. And we have we have to change our thinking. But yeah, depression, Scott, I found in research and in my own life and experience, and just in counseling situations, and even anxiety too, it's coming out. Stuffed hatred and resentment will definitely be a depression fueler. And also, they're finding that it fuels anxiety as well. So,
Well, one thing I wanted to add, if I could,
yeah,
only because this was something that I had to do in a certification class. Um, you know, I found it pretty amazing that, the short of it is all the literature that's out there about movement, specifically exercise, and how it changes the chemistry in the brain. If it was a pill, it would be like the biggest super drug out there. And one of the problems is, how do you help people start a new routine? It's not always easy. I always find that some of the simplest things in life to do become the hardest when you try to make something a routine. But I would say that, you know exercise is just like, it's paramount.
yeah, I agree. I agree. We would, stress, anger, whatever it is, you exercise. I, and sometimes if I am out of sorts or I need to sort something out, if I exercise while I'm exercising, the Holy Spirit will minister to me and show me different things.
It's
And
it's
yeah, in fact, during my grief, in the midst of the hardest parts of my grief journey, exercise is the one thing that I did consistently, and it really, really helped. It really helped me a lot. And there was one particular time that I went and swam, and immediately when I stopped swimming and took a deep breath and was kind of cooling down from my workout, I got this truth hit me right between the eyes that was very. I needed to hear it in my spirit and in my soul, and it really was helping me with one of my troubling issues. And that happened quite a bit, a couple times exercising, you know. And you could probably talk to the side of that. Exercising actually releases chemicals into your body that kind of give you, a sense of feeling good, a sense of wellness. They
yeah.
say it's almost like a natural drug, right?
There's literally, it's literally wired in our neurology. So when we're doing movement, um, a lot of people have heard the word proprioception, but really what that means, it's there's these mechanoreceptors. So there's these things in our neurology that fire off when we move, and they go up the spinal cord and feed into these centers in the brain that actually then produce chemicals. So there's actually movement pleasure pathways that affect the brain chemistry and balance out the serotonin, the dopamine. There's an interesting thing is also there's movement learning pathways. So there's literally wired in our neurology. Movement actually changes in the amygdala and it changes in certain parts of the brain our ability to learn and store information, short term and long term. And one of the popular doctors who wrote a few books, one was Spark, Dr. John Rady. He's a Harvard, I think, psychiatrist at Harvard. Yeah, so I think he's a psychiatrist, but he wrote a book, Spark, and he got real involved and was talking about, how exercise and movement's better than the drugs.
That's a picture of my brother who's talking. That exercise and movement is actually better than the drugs, you said, huh?
Well, there's always debatable things, and it always depends on each individual. So it's, I like to say, the right thing for the right person at the right time, and I basically paraphrased and stole that from this guy, Dr. Shiva, who talks about personalized medicine. But that's the idea. Is for a lot of people, it would be, like I said, it would be considered one of those, magic bullet drugs if you could put it in a pill.
Yeah. And Scott, think about the importance now that I mean, people are home. A lot of people are working from home. A lot of people are sitting at the computer working from home. The need to get into some kind of routine. And there's all sorts of, you've sent me things, there's all sorts of videos and resources out there on YouTube. If you just look up like 20-minute home exercise, I mean, it's so important to keep that aspect of going, to find some way to do some very good exercises. I mean, you can go for walks and jogs or whatever in your neighborhood, but you have to find that outlet. I think it's going to be very important people to pay attention to it. There's lots of jokes and memes out there about people gaining weight during the quarantine and all that, but we don't have to. We can fight back, right, and push ourselves.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've been failing miserably. It's funny. I'm such a creature of habit and routine that, you know, I I I have a thing that I've been doing. I do certain things on Monday and then other things on Tuesday. So I had a 5-day routine of different things, and then quarantine hit. The gyms closed down, and I was like a big failure of working out. Like I just got done working out earlier, but I wasn't working out at all like I've been. And last week I was like, I gotta get back. Like, what's going on with me? You know, I did some, manual labor one day. Was really awesome. So, I wasn't like I was just sitting around for 4 weeks, but instead of doing stuff like 5 days a week, it just was much different experience. And I realized I'm like, wow, I'm such a creature of routine. I got to start a new routine. I got to figure out a new routine. I got to program something in different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the same thing for me. And one of the things that at the outset, one of the things that Carrie and I talked about was how like we're both teachers, so we're homeschooling, and we don't want to be in each other's space, but we don't want to get on each other's nerves. We want to communicate effectively. So we talked about what we like and what we don't like, and what we need and don't need. I think it's so important for people to communicate about what's going on. And we talked a lot about exercise, because her and we would I belong to the gym too, and I'd go to the gym. But I think for families, my advice to everybody, like I said from the outset as I wrap this up, is that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for everybody to really deal with, maybe, I mean, whatever comes to the surface, maybe it's time. There's an expression: when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I found that over and over and over again. And I would really advise, families, now look at this as an opportunity to really, and John Glenn talked about the word he kept hearing from the Lord was reset. Think of it as a time to reset. And if things get out of hand or hairy, and you find you're on each other's nerves and you're angry and things get ugly, this might be the stuff coming to the surface that God wants to deal with and he wants to heal. So I just want to recap from the book Power to Love. The chapter starts in page 42, especially when you're not gonna stuff or dump your emotions, right? You're gonna dump them on God. I'm talking about when dumping is you dump it on your partner or you dump it on somebody else, right? And oh, John just popped in. Let's get John in here. Hey, John.
Hey, Bill. I just
How you
got
coping?
your.
Huh?
Say what?
How you
I
coping
just
today?
I just got out of a rainstorm, a bad rainstorm, and here at the ranch, and I was just catching the end of your broadcast here, and just wanted to say hey to Scott and tell him I appreciate him being with you
Yeah.
and joining us here, and appreciate what he had to say. I'm trying something new here. I'm trying to get on my phone. So if things get a little weird, I drop my phone or something. So, but
Yeah.
what you've been talking about here is extremely important right now. This I'm beginning to see um, indications of a cultural meltdown going on here with the pandemic. With the stay-at-home orders and that sort of thing. I think most of us are trying to deal with it as best we can. But one of the issues that I've noticed is that the social distancing that's required is really taking a toll on us. Um,
Yeah.
instead of having the opportunity to hug somebody, you got to stay 6 feet away from them. And I've never been, an outrageous hugger or anything of that nature, but I'd like to shake hands with someone or rub your bald head, Bill, occasionally. But I think that tactile um, sense that we have of security and fellowship and that sort of thing, I think is a lot more important than what we've given credit to before. And we're missing that.
Yeah.
Everybody's missing it. And it's kind of like a strange thing. Even normally, when I would interact with someone, even in a business deal of some sort, I had a fellow come out and repair the track hoe that I have today. And, I wanted to shake hands and tell him thank you, but it was awkward, because of the social distancing. So
Yeah.
I think that's an underlying stress that we need to recognize as being something that, needs to be addressed here and within our circles, our family and social circles, so that we can try to overcome by expressing our love in different ways. But that touch, from infancy on, is absolutely vital, and it's missing right now. And
Yeah.
so I just wanted to pipe in. I'm sure you guys have already covered that. I just wanted to add my 2 cents in.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because wasn't there an article years, either a book or an article about infants that were left alone would die, would
Oh,
like
oh,
without touch and
yeah, that was a study. I think I forget who did it now, but it was during the Second World War when uh, London was being bombed to smithereens, and there were a lot of babies who were orphaned, infants whose parents had been killed or whatever. And even though that they were cared for physically in the sense that they were fed and clothed and sheltered, some of these babies began to die for no apparent reason at all. I mean, it was just like they had no explanation. They thought immediately of some kind of bacteria or bug or whatever, but they couldn't find any explanation for it
yeah,
until one of the more alert staff members noticed the difference between the babies who lived and the babies who died. And the difference was the babies who lived were the quote cute babies that a staff member would take time to play with, to hold, to touch, more than the other babies whenever they had time. And so what they did was they brought in foster mothers whose only job was to actually play with, touch, hold these kids, and none of the rest of them died. I mean, that put an end to it.
yeah,
That's how vital that tactile sense is, to our well-being. So, and that goes with us throughout adulthood. It's not just because, not just for kids, but for all of us as well. So
yeah, yeah,
that social distancing has really taken a toll on us,
yeah,
psychologically, personally, relationally, more than we know.
yeah. Maybe some people get it from their girlfriends at work or their buddies at work, and they're not getting it at home because of the unspoken stuff. But yeah, that's amazing. What do you think about Scott? You're a little Aspergerish. Do you miss hugging and physical contact?
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I wrote that in the private comment over there so you could see it. But yeah, I would say that observing my son and myself, um, it's I don't I think with people that are wired this way, we don't necessarily um, it's not as big as a detriment in our mental and emotional makeup because maybe there's like that piece is a little missing anyways to begin with. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Let me ask you this, Scott. You went to a funeral yesterday, didn't you? And how do you think the lack of hugging and touching affected all that?
Well, yeah, well, we were all in our cars and it was a drive-by procession, so the actual services will be another time, because up in New Jersey, every state's a little different, but you know, I guess we're number two after New York with all the cases and whatnot, so things are a little rough around here. But we had about 200 cars, and yeah, it was it was a beautiful thing to do, but to not be able to have a normal viewing and funeral and all of that with the family, and it was weird. It was very strange. It was it was sad and different, and still processing it.
Yeah, my heart goes out to the families that are losing loved ones at this time because they're not going to have that traditional, that extra support, you know, and just we'll keep those folks in prayer as well. You got anything you want to say before you wrap it up, John?
No, I'm about to lose control of this phone, as you can tell.
Your phone worked pretty good, though, so you know. All
I
right,
think that's
Scott,
Hey, I wanted to say thanks, John. I appreciate your kind words.
you bet, brother. It's good to see you.
All
all right.
right.
So tomorrow night is marriage class at 7 o'clock, and then Thursday is the alpha class. John, you got anything planned?
Not yet.
All right. Well,
I'm,
maybe you
I'm
can jump
working
in.
on some stuff with the 12 steps. Okay,
Yeah.
so and I'll try to get a better setup than my phone for that.
All right. Maybe
All
you
right.
can jump in.
Yeah,
I'm going to send
yeah,
you
I
the
will.
invite. Jump in any class that we do. So,
You bet.
all right.
Appreciate you,
All right.
Bill.
We're out. Now, remember, everybody, let's
Well,
hug your families, hug one another, be good to one another. And, you know, and if you need to let the bear out, let the bear out to the one who knows you better than you know yourself. Scott, I really appreciate you joining in. I hope you join in some more. Um, and get your, so we can see your beautiful face too. You can get your camera all set up.
Yeah, man. I love you, brother. Thanks for giving me the invite to come on and hang out.
All right, Scott. Love you, man. Everybody else, thank you for joining us, and I hope you join us in the future. And if you have any comments and any questions, just put it either in the comment section or you can inbox Alpha Ministries Church at the Woods. God bless you.